comes to objection handling, obviously one of the big things that we want to do is try to maximize our dollar. So, meaning we want to try to handle objections as best as possible. And I know you guys have heard me talk about Dana Neeson several times. Um, I saw a Instagram, basically what the objection is whenever a client calls in and you're talking to them and they say they're just hell bent on getting 100,000 in coverage, right? Um, Basically, what you do is you ask them, okay, so you want $100,000 in coverage. Obviously, you ask why, okay, and that's the first start is to figure out and the whole so everybody knows part of this process or part of the reasoning behind this process is to um, you're always searching for that suspect or prospect, right? So if it's you want to, and sometimes you find a suspect almost at the part of quoting. Sometimes you find a suspect whenever it comes to sometimes you find a suspect right at the beginning, but the ultimate goal is to they bring up 100,000. You ask them, okay, so why are you looking for $100,000? They tell you, well, I just want to leave everything I possibly can behind for my kids, and I want to make sure that they have something, and I want to leave them as much money as possible. And $100,000 sounds really nice. Well, one of the questions you can ask is, okay, so say you couldn't qualify for 100,000, would you just not get anything? And you wait for them. Always keep in mind that when you're talking with the client, you want to make sure, or when you're asking a client a question, make sure you're not talking too much. Um, Meaning you ask the question, let them answer. Just sit there and be quiet. So you say you want 100,000. What happens if you can't qualify for it, or you can't afford it? Are you just not going to get 100,000? Right? Are you just not going to get any coverage whatsoever? And when they say, depending on what they say, some will say, well, no, I'm just not going to get anything. That's a suspect. Okay. So that's where you say, okay, look, it just doesn't make sense. If that's what you're wanting, then, unfortunately, that's not going to be in your budget, right? Because by this time, you typically should have an idea of what their budget is, or if you don't, ask them. Um, but if their budget is $50 and they say they want 100,000 and they're 73, that they're not going to meet the fold, right? Um, so that's one way. Now, another way that you can handle that is by telling them, just ask them, okay, so if you went to the bank and you wanted to get a loan, in one hand you've got 100,000, and in the other hand you've got 20,000. Okay, the 100,000, the bank, there's a 3% chance that the bank is going to give you the 100,000, but there's 100% chance that the bank's going to give you a loan for 20,000. If you wanted to leave any money behind for your kids, which one would you choose? Can anybody guess what normally would be the question, the answer?
Guarantee.
What?
The guaranteed one,
The
right?
guaranteed one. That's
Okay.
exactly. He's like, did I say it wrong? What? Yes, yes. The guarantee. So 20,000, right? Everybody's going to want the 20,000 because why would you want to run the risk of 3,000? And keep that in mind that when you're talking about final expenses, you're talking about somebody over the age of 50. So at the age of 50, the likelihood that somebody is going to be able to pay for 100,000, and then on top of it, that they're actually going to live long enough, or that they're not going to outlive the term of 100,000. Um, that's why it's a three. It's actually probably less than 3%. You're probably actually looking more like a less than 1% chance And I don't know if everybody knows this, but most term, so literally 99% of term does not pay out within its contract. And a reason why is because, well, term is only for a certain period of time. So now, obviously, there's always exceptions to the rule, but that is the typical situation whenever it comes to term. So, um, so again, you ask them, which would you choose for your children or for your family? And now, 99%, I would say the prospects are going to say the 20,000, and that's when you tell them. Okay, so there's your answer. So when you're talking about the life insurance company, they're offering you that 100,000 because there's less than 3% chance that they're actually going to have to pay out that claim. So if you have your choice of which life insurance policy to get now, which would you rather? 100,000 or 20,000? Now, if they say 100,000 at this point, again, that's where you mark them off as a suspect and you roll on. So there's only so much common sense that certain people have, and you're not going to force common sense into somebody. So just a bit of a unique way to handle objections, especially someone who is looking for a large sum of money. Now, I wouldn't recommend saying, going through that whole spiel right out the gate if they're saying, well, I want 50,000. Fact find. You start off a conversation, you're like, well, so Sebastian, how long have you been looking into options? And they say, well, I've been looking for a couple months. I'm looking for 50,000. Don't go right into something like that. But as you start to, I guess I should add to that the initial questions that you're asking, that's just a conversation starter to get an idea of where they're at. Because most people will divulge their information, tell you all about what's going on. So, but again, remember, you're not going to start off with that type of rebuttal right out the gate or objection handling right out the gate. You're going to get into the conversation and then you bring it in. So the whole goal is to be tactful with everything that you're asking. Sometimes things seem very ridiculous. I know I've had clients in the past who they say some silly crap like that, well, I was wanting $100,000. And then you get through the conversation, and as you go through, just running through the script, all of a sudden you wind up explaining everything, and you're like, oh wow, that really makes sense. Okay, yeah, so I don't really need 100,000, or I'm not going to be able to afford 100,000, but I do need something for my kids. So just remember, don't handle objections right out the gate. Only ask questions. So, does anybody have any questions on objection handling or how to deal with certain people or anything like that? Anybody run into an objection that they're just like, I don't know how the hell to handle